Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine the 6th of November. Today we have some updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to continue or to complete the things that I wanted to tell you yesterday about Kherson district. And the thing is that the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack this area, and mainly, as we can see right now, they're totally concentrated on the front line on this wide area between the Ukrainian territory and the Russian territory. They're trying to attack Sukhanova, to take in direction of Mylova. They want to attack Kochkarovka, Sablukovka, the south outskirts of Duchan, and so on. And every time they made another attempt in this direction, all their attacks were repulsed, and all the time they were forced to step back. And as I understand, something is not enough, and as I believe the Ukrainians decided to change the tactic in this area, and according to the deployment map, the Ukrainians decided to move Azov battalion to this area. As you can see, this is a very fresh update, and I believe that the Ukrainians decided to move some kind of anti-retreat forces in this area, and their main goal is to force the Ukrainian forces in this area, to be more precise, the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade and 17 tanks and some kind of mechanized battalions in this area to complete their mission. And as we discussed many times, the Ukrainians first of all want to take control over Sukhanova and this bridgehead, not just to short the front line and to get as close as possible to this area. Furthermore, we know that according to the new help that Ukrainians will receive, they will receive around 40 armored boats of unknown type, and of course these boats the Ukrainians are planning to use to attack Zaporozhye area through Dnipro region and so on. So that was the thing that I didn't complete yesterday about the Azov battalion. Now let's talk about the front lines. The front lines are stable. There are a lot of clashes along the front lines. The Ukrainians are still pushing, trying to penetrate the Russians' defense orders. They're attacking the same areas like Kotlarovka on Kupinsk front line and Novoselovka in this area. Both these two attacks were repulsed by the Russians, and the Russians reported that as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost around 200 soldiers and something around 25 armored vehicles. If we're talking about Kotlarovka, the Ukrainians were attacking in this area using almost 1 BTG. And if we're talking about Novoselovska, the Ukrainians were using about campaign tactical group, something like this. The Russians are called this unit with this, like a campaign tactical group, and they were attacking this area, but all the attacks were repulsed. Also, the Ukrainians were attacking all along the front line, the same areas, Stelmakhovka, Plashanka, all the Yampolovka, all these towns. The Ukrainians, all those attacks were repulsed as well, and the Ukrainians during those attacks lost around 250 soldiers, 18 armored vehicles, something around 2 artillery systems in this area. Furthermore, we haven't heard for a very long time that the Russians were attacking some kind of Ukrainian bases. During the previous months, as soon as the Russians changed their focus by attacking the energy facilities, as you see, the Russians stopped reporting about the attacks on some kind of bases, some kind of, I don't know, industrial areas in towns like Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians were collecting their forces and so on. But during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the Liman, or Red Liman as the Russians call this town. They hit the foreign forces base, and they just killed around 100 soldiers and destroyed around 10 armored vehicles. And the Russians reported that mainly the loss around 40 soldiers were the losses among the United States volunteers and Polish volunteers as well. If we're talking about the front line between Bilogorovka and, let's say, New York agglomeration, there are very heavy clashes along the front line. The same situation in the Russians. On this front line, the Russians are trying to attack in direction of Bilogorovka and Sporne, at least we're talking about the north. As you can see, the main area, the main base that the Russians has in this front line is oil refinery, and I believe that for them it's very a fortified fortress from their side. I believe it's highly unlikely that Ukrainians are able to pass this fortress. If they want to develop their offensive operation in direction of Lysychansk first, they need to take this oil refinery, but I believe it's highly unlikely it is possible to do so. That's why the Russians from their side are attacking in this area. And if we're talking about Sporna, to tell the truth, I'm not sure about the tactical reason of attacking this area. For now, Seversk front line has been freezed for a very long time, so maybe just was some kind of recon combat and just not to give the Ukrainians in this area to be relaxed. And if we're talking about Bilogorovka, of course, this area is very important. The Russians are trying to return control over this area, and the main thing is just that they just want to short the front line and not to allow the Ukrainian forces in Grigorievka and Serebryanka to cross Seversky Donetsk so easy, and to not allow these forces to help the Ukrainians that locate Zarechno and Tarskoye to attack Kreminna, just also to be on the safe side. If we are talking about Bakhmut today, we got at least the Western sources map. If you're talking about the deployment map, and the Russian source map confirmed, I believe, the second time in a row that the Russians got control over Ivangrad, and that now there are very heavy clashes in the small suburbs of Bakhmut by the name of Oputna. This one. Now the Russians are storming this area. This is a very difficult job for them, because we know that Ukrainians move a lot of armored, a lot of mechanized brigade in this area. Let's just take a look at this map of this position. You're gonna see that at least in this area there are 53rd Mechanized Brigade, 62nd Mechanized Brigade, 30th Mechanized Brigade. All these brigades are pretty fresh. Furthermore, there are a lot of forces. It's not so easy job to penetrate this area, but the Russians don't have any other options. They need to continue doing something, so that's why they're pushing. And we can say that they're pretty successful. At least till today I haven't heard that Wagner's had any mistakes in their operations. They're pretty stable. This is one of the most stable forces in the Russian army, and popular. If you're talking about the popular ones, of course. There were no updates about Mayorsk. I believe that there are very heavy clashes as well, but at least no updates. Maybe the Russians are prepared for another wave of storming this area. If we are talking about Donetsk, there were no updates. Just today during the day we received some kind of updates about the situation, some videos, video confirmation saying that the Russians control this area for 100%, that they destroyed during the previous days some kind of few artillery system in this area and so on, and that they're pushing in this area. And now we are moving to the South Donetsk area, to Pavlograd. We discussed that a few days ago the Russians started their offensive operation in this area, that we discussed the positive and negative sides of that offensive operation. If we're talking about the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, they reported that the Russians were attacking in the direction of Pavlovka, in the direction of Novomikhailivka, and in the direction of Vremivka on these bridgeheads, and during those attacks they managed to kill around, the Ukrainian losses were around 70 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, something around 2 artillery systems. But today during the day we start receiving a lot of very interesting updates from the Russian sources about situation in Pavlograd. To be short, the Russians are saying that they were completely defeated in Pavlovka. That the losses of the Russians are so high in this area. To be more precise, the Russians were saying about 155th Marine Battalion or something like this, and the losses are very high. And those soldiers who survived those storming operation, they stopped by themselves. They refused to continue offensive operation in this area. Maybe there's some kind of speculation. Maybe there's some kind of media campaign trying to relax the Ukrainian soldiers on the north, because we understand that Ukrainians are watching and following the same military experts that we do, and everybody knows that happens everywhere. Of course, we understand that maybe that was some kind of media trying to show the Ukrainians that, just to make them relax and so on. But if we're talking about the facts, without any projection, is if whether there was some kind of speculation or not, the Russians were completely defeated in Pavlovka. I'm not saying that they were forced to step back. By saying completely defeated, I mean that they had a lot of losses, and the price that they pay to take control over the south part of Pavlovka is too high. And this price, this area became priceless for the Russians. As we discussed, and mainly the Russians confirmed the things that we discussed, that because of the fact that Ugledar is located on the highland, and the Ukrainians are attacking the Russians from this area with everything they have, they control their movements totally. It's very difficult to attack, it's very difficult to be mobile and so on. Furthermore, don't forget that there are still Ukrainian forces in the north part. And furthermore, these forces from Russian forces who were the part who was involved in that attack, they wrote some kind of letter to the Minister of Defense, and they required to make some kind of investigation. Why did that happen? Why did the generals of Russian staff took such a kind of decision without any preparation, decided to start this suicide operation that brought to, I don't know, endless losses from the Russian side. This is the situation that the Russians discussed these days about that operation. So we'll see, we'll follow. They have already published the names of those generals who was, according to the information from the front line, who was responsible for that suicide operation and so on. So we'll see, and we'll follow this, because as you can see, I believe that soon we're going to receive the number of the losses from the Russian side. I believe the Ukrainians will provide, if it's true. And so we'll see, because the Russian soldiers are asking themselves one question, and now this is the question which we will discuss right now. We will try to analyze together. The Russians are saying that during the previous months after mobilization process, the Russians adopted a lot of laws about the fact that if you surrender without, if it's not like if it was unnecessary, if you're a Russian soldier and you surrender, you will go to jail. So the Russians adopted a lot of laws that make the Russian soldiers to fight till the last blood, and not to surrender, not to give up, not to step back, because if you do anything like this, you can get to jail. So they make very difficult law for the soldiers, and those soldiers now on Russian segment of internet are discussing, it's okay, we are ready to fight till the last blood, we are ready to storm, we are ready to attack, it's okay not to give up, not to survive, but we don't see any adoption, any laws that will make the same thing with generals who plans and who are trying to plan and trying to implement the attack operations. So we want to do the same. So if, let's say, some general prepared some kind of operation, ordered soldiers to attack, and as a result of that attack, let's say 100 soldiers were killed, that means that this general must be, I don't know, go to jail as well. So this is like, at least it will be fair. So the Russians, believe me, they're trying to prepare to make some kind of fair system in the army. I'm not sure if it's possible to create, but anyway, if those generals, if it's true about the Pavlovka operation, if those generals didn't make simple calculations about this operation, and if as a result of those attacks a lot of Russians were killed, I believe that they deserve to be punished. Of course, it's like it's fair. I believe it's fair, but let's wait a little bit to understand whether there was a true information, or maybe it was some kind of speculation or media war trying to force the Ukrainians maybe to start some kind of counter-offensive operation where they will be completely reduced by the Russians. If we're talking about Orekhov, Gulyai-Polye area, there are no changes as well. The front line totally is stable. If we're talking about Energodar, today we got another interesting update. As you know, the Zaporozhye power plant was cut off from the Ukraine, but during the previous 24 hours, the Russian source reported that the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant was connected to the Ukrainian energy system. So for now, there are no more analysis about the situation, no more updates. Why did they do this, and so on. First, they reduced the Ukrainian energy facility almost to ruins, and now they're connecting their power plant to the Ukraine. Of course, there are a lot of logic. At least it's a business; you can earn money on that. But if we're talking about the losses in Pavlovka, so is it okay when your soldiers are dying and now you're selling energy to your enemy? So there are much more questions than the answers to the Russian commanders in this situation. But let's follow. Maybe it's also another kind of speculation. If we're talking about Kherson district, there were updates as well. The Ukrainians were attacking the same direction of Petykhatki, Sukhanova, Sablukovka. So the same areas, there was another echo in combat. So all their attacks were repulsed by the Russians, and as a result of the previous 24 hours attacks, the Ukraine lost around 50 soldiers, 18 armed vehicles, something around 2 artillery systems. Furthermore, the Russians continue doing evacuation process, and today they reported about some kind of evacuation, about the progress of evacuation process in Novakhovka. They reported that around 1,000 civilians were evacuated from this area, and the Russians continue doing this. Furthermore, today we got update that Ukrainians attacked the energy facility of this area, and as a result of that attack, almost entire Kherson district was without electricity for some period of time. Maybe this area is still without electricity, so let's see and let's follow. For now, there were no updates about the situation. And as you know, during the previous hours, we got more and more conversation, more and more rumors or talks that Western countries are forcing the Ukrainians to start negotiation process with the Russians, or at least to make some kind of media sphere where everybody should consider the Ukrainians as a party who wants to start negotiation process. For now, the terms of those negotiations doesn't matter. The main goal is to show a message that the Ukrainians want to start negotiation process with the Russians. There were a lot of updates about the terms, about the peace agreement, and if we're talking about the Ukrainians, they want the Russians to leave this area. I believe it's highly unlikely, and of course, if we're talking about the Russians, they want to sign an agreement, and they want confirmation and, let's say, recognition from every single country in the world that these territories is the part of Russian Federation. And as we understand, the Russians even are ready to leave Kherson and to leave this bank of the river as a negotiation position in upcoming negotiation process. But if it's talking about the Ukrainians, this is not enough for them. They want something more. Maybe they want to return control over a nuclear power plant as well, to create some kind of demilitarization zone in this area. Like this small part of Zaporozhye would become a part of Ukraine, and also this territory would become part of Ukraine. Maybe this is going to be enough, but I'm not sure that the Russians are ready for that, because in this case, this nuclear power plant will become a fortress that the Russians won't be able to get control over anywhere during possible upcoming conflicts with Ukraine. This is the first thing, and the second thing, that this nuclear power plant will become a dirty nuclear bomb. And if the Russians, it's some kind of, we can say, if the Russians returns this power plant to the Ukraine, we can say that it will be some kind of guarantee to Ukraine that the Russians won't start won't start any special operation in the future, because this will be like some kind of very powerful nuclear bomb. And if the Russians start, the Ukrainians will be able to destroy this power plant, and I believe that the south of Ukraine will be completely polluted with all these things, and the Russians will be forced just to stop. So maybe this is the thing of negotiation process. So we'll see, we'll follow. But anyway, the time's coming. We know that the Russians managed to deploy around just 80,000 soldiers on the territory of Ukraine, and now another 220,000 are still in training centers, and maybe the total picture of Ukraine will be changed as soon as the Russians deployed the entire army mobilized army on the territory of Ukraine. Maybe after that, the Russians will say what to do, when to do, and how to do. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.